Welcome to the LowCarbMD podcast. No one is beyond help. No one is beyond hope.
As we have always said, we are bringing you medical information and cutting-edge science, but none of this is medical advice. Please seek out input from your own doctor.
Hello and welcome back to the Life's Best Medicine and Low Carb MD podcast. This one's so important. I want to run it on both so that all of my listeners can hear it. We have a legend here. You may know him from Wheat Belly, Grain Brain, Undoctored. Now he has a new one called Super Gut. Dr. William Davis, cardiologist. Now you're talking crap with me.
That's right. My favorite topic nowadays.
Isn't it amazing? Us Western medicine guys, and all of a sudden we start realizing maybe there's more to this story and not just taking out certain foods. And if we have a sick gut, how do we fix that? So, I mean, your book is amazing. And I'll hold it up for people who are here, that are watching. But Super Gut, buy this. I'm telling all my, I should just get a stamp because I'm telling all my patients, you got to read this book, look at it, you know, and change your mindset a little bit. So tell me how you came, like your transition in medicine from being a standard cardiologist to starting to look at more functional medicine type stuff, looking at like what else is going on here with, you know, with Wheat Belly and now transitioning to the gut.
You know, the whole Wheat Belly adventure got its start 20 some years ago when I set up the first CT heart scanner. Actually, so long ago, Brent, it was an EBT heart scanner from South San Francisco. And we're scanning people left and right. I did this because my mom died of sudden cardiac death after a 2-vessel coronary angioplasty. And it became clear how inadequate managing coronary disease from a cath lab was. It's a ridiculous way. Yeah, you can deal with emergencies, but what about all the people who die before they get to the hospital or have disease that's well advanced and require procedures? Can we identify this disease well before that happens? Of course, the conventional answer is to use cholesterol testing, which of course is a ridiculous idea. It's outdated, it's rusty, it should have been discarded 40 years ago, but it's still around because it makes so much money. But I wanted to wait, so I set up the first EBT heart scanner 20 some years ago. We're scanning people left and right. And of course, as you know, when you look for coronary disease, you find it everywhere. And back then, the only solution was what my colleagues to this day still call optimal medical therapy, baby aspirin, low-fat diet, high-dose statin cholesterol drug, and maybe some other things, exercise, etc. Well, we help publish these data. If you do nothing, none of those things, the score goes up 25% per year, and you get a few steps closer to dying, having a heart attack, sudden cardiac death, etc. If you take baby aspirin, low-fat diet, exercise, high-dose statin drug, the score goes up 25% per year, has zero impact on that measure. It's a ridiculous notion that this is optimized. So what do you do with thousands of people freaking out on you? So I had to zigzag and try to find the answer. It took me some years, but it led to some very, very important lessons. For instance, vitamin D added to the mix was the first time I saw coronary calcium scores drop. I mean, drop, not like 10%. I'm talking like 800 dropping to 400, dramatic. And when I looked at the scans, yeah, the plaque had actually shrunk dramatically. Calcium and the non-calcified parts shrunk. So that led to looking for better answers. It led to testing with lipoprotein testing rather than cholesterol testing. And of course, if you have coronary disease, such as a coronary calcium score that's positive, you virtually always have small LDL particles, not LDL cholesterol, but small LDL particles, virtually everybody with coronary disease, with rare exceptions. Well, back then, the science out of UC Berkeley, out of Hopkins, out of some of the Texas institutes was clear. The only foods that cause small LDL particles, wheat, grains, and sugar, not saturated fat, not fat. So I asked people to take wheat, grains, and sugar out of their diet, and they did that. Of course, small LDL would drop from like 2,000 nanomoles per liter, particle count per volume, to 0 or other very low number. But they would also say, why did I lose 57 pounds? Why did my hemoglobin A1C drop so low I had to stop all my diabetes medications? So you've heard all these things. Why did I have to stop 3 blood pressure medicines? Why is my ulcerative colitis now gone? So it led to, but the thing was that people experienced dramatic improvements in health, weight, appearance, etc., but not everybody went 100% all the way back. One of the most common experiences was I'm still left with my food intolerances to histamine-containing foods, FODMAPs, fructose, fruit, legumes, etc. And it became clear that the microbiome, the intestinal microbiome, was to blame, that we as a society have massively disrupted the human microbiome. And it was responsible not just for food intolerances, but other phenomena, skin rashes, migraine headaches, depression, and numerous other health conditions. But when you address the microbiome, as you know, you start to see all those conditions unravel.
Yeah, that's the remarkable part about it. When you start, for me, I was treating diabetes. So I said, okay, let's cut out the processed food. Let's cut out the carb. We're doing the same thing you're doing, right? Because if you're teaching us this stuff. So let's get rid of wheat and, all these GMOs, whatever, and see how you do. And the surprising thing is the mood would get better. People say, gosh, I'm enjoying life again. I'm laughing. I'm not so stressed out. I'm not craving alcohol as much. I'm not craving drugs as much as I used to. All these kind of things. I'm thinking this is really odd that they're having this much of an effect, because I think in medicine, what we're doing nowadays, there's two debates going on, I think, on Twitter where I see people fighting. One is the calories in, calories out, eat less, exercise more. The other camp is more the metabolic, like Jason Fung, let's look at the insulin level and the effect of the food on our system. But I think one of the things we've been really missing is the gut microbiome and its role in these things, right? So that's part of it, because if you're eating 500 calories of gummy bears versus 500 calories of salmon, it's going to have a different impact on your gut microbiome, your hormone levels. And I think that's what's been lost in the confusion here.
Yeah, so all the things we've done to modern people, like take 30 courses of antibiotics in most people by age 40, glyphosate, the ingredient in Roundup that is not just an herbicide but also an antibiotic, food additives like preservatives and emulsifying agents like polysorbate 80 in common foods like ice cream and peanut butter and salad dressings, other drugs, statin drugs, anti-inflammatory drugs, stomach acid blocking drugs, birth control pills. We swim in an ocean of factors that have disrupted the human microbiome. And the two things I see happening are that, one, we've lost species of microbes that provided real important functions to human health. And then two, in their place, unhealthy microbes have proliferated, especially stool type species like E. coli, Salmonella, and Klebsiella, and then ascended in many people. Brian, that took me by surprise, because I thought this idea of small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or these unhealthy stool microbes, what many people call fecalization, I thought it was rare. But this device came out, the Air device. This is the old one. My new one's in the kitchen. It's black.
I have, because of you, I have one on order, so it should be coming pretty soon. So I'll be messing around with that. That's pretty awesome.
Now, I should tell your listeners, you don't need to have a device to succeed in this, but it does help some people, particularly if you're uncertain. Many people just rely on what I call telltale signs of SIBO. That is, so 30 feet, the entire GI tract, trillions of microbes. And of course, they live only for minutes to hours. They don't live for decades. So there's a rapid turnover, trillions of creatures. When they die, much of their breakdown products, or some of their breakdown products, enter the bloodstream. And this is such an important phenomenon to be aware of, the process of endotoxemia. A lot of us have suspected that gut leak has been a real phenomenon for many years, but it was finally validated by Dr. Patrice Canny in Belgium in 2007. And he showed in that initial study that this process of endotoxemia was a major driver of insulin resistance, your body's inability to respond to insulin. That's the process that leads to type 2 diabetes, dementia, cancers, coronary disease, hypertension, fatty liver, and numerous other conditions. Well, so microbes in the GI tract, especially when all 30 feet are filled with fecal microbes, export their products, and you can experience that process as rosacea or psoriasis in the skin, or as depression, or Alzheimer's dementia, or Parkinson's disease in the brain, or as joint pain and muscle aches of fibromyalgia or restless leg syndrome. In other words, virtually all common chronic modern conditions need to be re-examined, reassessed in light of this new finding.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I had a patient yesterday. He said he's complaining of restless legs. I go, we should look at your gut microbiome. He starts laughing like, come on, doctor, you're crazy, right? But I'm like, look, Dr. Davis is saying in his book, get the book, right? And we'll talk about it. But it is interesting. He has a long history of gut dysbiosis and all these kind of problems, right? So it's as amazing. It's almost embarrassing looking back at how many people I've seen with chronic constipation, with chronic diarrhea, and we fail to think about SIBO or think about the effect of the microbiome, because it seems like alien invaders are coming into your bodies. To people like to talk about parasites and infections, that if we treat those infections, and people don't realize, one of the big things people don't realize is that your gut is a huge part of your immune system. I think it's 70 or 75% of your immune system. That's where and if it's inflamed, destroyed, you're sitting on a lot of visceral fat. All that inflammation is going to cause some problems in your immune response.
Yeah, and recognizing that also gives you the path to rebuilding an immune response. So one of my favorite microbe in the world is Lactobacillus Rotary, Reuteri, after the German microbiologist who discovered it in 1962, Dr. Gerhard Reuter. He got it from breast milk, and back then, by the way, it was easy to find. You can get it from people's stool, you get it from women's breast milk, but today almost nobody has it. Because while Rotary is extremely important to human health, as well as other mammals, squirrels have it, chipmunks have it, dogs have it, cats have it, indigenous human populations all have it, 100%. Almost nobody in the modern world has it anymore. So when you restore it, wonderful things happen, including a big boost in your immune response. There's one study in a mouse study that I'd like to see if we can reproduce it in humans, and that is the reversal of thymic involution, that is thymic atrophy. So your listeners may recall that the thymus gland, sitting right in the front of the chest underneath the breastbone, is at its maximum size and T cell producing capacity, that is the cells that protect us from viruses, bacteria, and cancer, reaches its maximum size and T cell production capacity at age 15. And every year thereafter, it shrinks and shrinks and shrinks and reduces its capacity to produce T cells, such that by age 70, it's only 10% of its former size and T cell producing capacity. And that, of course, is a big reason, part of the reason why people at 70 can die of the flu, but not at age 18, or pneumococcal pneumonia. And so in this mouse experiment, old mice with thymic atrophy had their thymus glands restored to youthful size and T cell production. I'd like to do that in a human study. We have a bunch of studies lined up. That's kind of at the end of the list because it's not my area. It's a really tough, expensive trial to perform. We'd have to do MRIs of the thymus and T cell subset analyses and that sort of thing. But it would be an incredible thing if we could show that youthful immunity is restored, which potentially has an impact on not just viral and bacterial infection susceptibility, but also probably cancer immunosurveillance. So real good stuff. That's just one microbe, of course. There's other microbes that participate in the immune response, like Lactobacillus casei, a big player.
And you raised some really important points. I mean, one of the points is, for a lot of the carnivores, and I'd love you maybe just to address this because this is one of the topics that comes up. So we have carnivores, and some of, the carnivore community is divided on certain things. One is honey, right? Some of the carnivores will have honey with their food, and they insist they feel better, their energy is better. And you raised the point that if you starve out some of these microbiome too much, they'll start eating your own colon mucus and causing a problem down the road. So sometimes you're going to need those prebiotic fibers, and so that's something to look at if someone starts developing gut health gut disorders down the road, or autoimmune type problems.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So I fear many people have done themselves or may do themselves long-term damage to their microbiomes and to general health, because you got to feed these creatures. It's like having a garden in the backyard. If you don't feed them, water and fertilize them in some fashion, or at least allow nutrients to be obtained from the soil, they're going to die. Same thing happens to your microbiome. If you don't feed them the fibers and other polysaccharides that they need, what happens is there are species that just die off, or at least are diminished in numbers. But there are species, I should point out, especially Akkermansia mucinophila, which have this added capacity. Well, if you deprive them of fibers, Akkermansia is unique in that it can turn to human mucus. So its full name is Akkermansia mucinophila, mucus lover. So it turns to human mucus. Now, this is a real problem in the small bowel, because the small bowel, 24 feet of small bowel, has a thin, fragile, single layer mucus barrier, unlike the colon that is accustomed to having all kinds of stool microbes and nasties. That has a much more durable double layer mucus barrier. So when species like stool species or Akkermansia get into the small bowel, it eats the mucus barrier, and that opens the door to this endotoxemia process, as well as inflammation of the intestinal wall. It's like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's. And so you have a big rise in endotoxemia when you do that, when you're deprived of the fibers that you're supposed to be getting from plant matter.
Yeah, and tell people a little bit about the LPS, right? That gets released into your lipopolysaccharides. Is that right? That gets released from the cell wall, and then it can make you really sick.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the dominant one, lipopolysaccharide or LPS. There's lipoteichoic acid and some others, but the major one is the ones from the stool microbes, the E. coli's and Klebsiellas and Pseudomonas type creatures. So they break down, release the LPS that gains entry into the bloodstream, and that it actually can be measured, not clinically, it's more of a research tool, but you can measure the rise in LPS when Akkermansia goes nuts, starts to eat your mucus barrier. What that does is it causes a metabolic disaster. Not only does it cause intestinal inflammation, so this is a typical experience. I go ketogenic or carnivore or some other variation on a super low carb, excessively low carb diet, and I lose weight. Oh, my blood sugar's dropping, my visceral fat's shrunk, my blood pressure's dropping, my triglycerides are dropping, my fatty liver's reversed. But then about a year, 18 months into it, you say, I'm regaining weight. I don't know why. I'm doing everything right. My triglycerides going back up. My HDL is dropping. My small LDL particles that cause heart disease going back up. My A1C is going back up. And then you develop kidney stones. Children stop growing. You get osteopenia, osteoporosis. You get skin rashes. And a lot of it is driven by that endotoxemia and the insulin resistance it causes. So the key here is not to be extreme in your, and there's also probably going to be a big rise in colon cancer. That may take 10 years plus to show up, not just because of disruption in the microbiome, but also the disruption of bile acid metabolism. There's a rise in so-called secondary bile acids, which are mild carcinogens. And so there's a lot of problems with that diet. Ironically, a ketogenic diet is among the best studied of diets because it was used, as you know, in children to reduce grand mal seizures that were intractable. And it works. There's about a 50% or so reduction in grand mal seizure frequency, which is great for these kids. But these kids also stop growing, develop calcium oxalate kidney stones. They develop osteopenia as teenagers. They develop dysbiosis, the overabundance of Akkermansia, colitis. I mean, all kinds of health problems. I mean, these kids don't have much of a choice. They have intractable seizures. But so ironically, ketogenic diet is among the best studied, and it is very popular, and it is unjustly popular.
So how do we, for people following a ketogenic diet or a low carb diet, like low carb, you're saying, okay, you're not going to have as much problem because you're still providing some carbohydrates in there. How about as far as adding in, like I know you've talked about protecting the mucus layer is really what we got to start thinking about, right?
You know, I think it all means reverting back to the way we were supposed to live all along. You know, we have 3 million years of adaptation to life on this planet coded into our genetic code. So in other words, so if you feed a shark kale and spinach, it's going to die. If you feed a lion broccoli and, it's going to die. In other words, every creature has a lifestyle coded into its genetic. Now, there's some leeway, of course, built into that as well, adaptation, but humans likewise. And we revert back to the way we're supposed to live. And of course, the best examples are the people who are indigenous, untouched by modern life, electronics, travel, antibiotics, herbicides, pesticides, industrial chemicals, like the Yanomami in the Brazilian rainforest, or the Matsas in the highlands of Peru, or the Maasai in Kenya, or the Hadza in Tanzania, or the Maori in New Zealand, or the populations in the jungles of New Guinea. All these populations, by the way, they have much greater species diversity, greater number of species in their microbiomes. They all have Rotary, by the way, and they all eat a specific way. The foods differ, of course, on different continents, but they all take a club, axe, or spear and kill something. Many will open the animal right there, the abdomen, eat the stomach and the intestines raw, drag the carcass back to their camp, cook it over a fire, eat the brain, heart, tongue, liver, thymus, pancreas, and then some of the meat. No one worries about calories. No one worries about fat. Then, of course, you also dig in the dirt for roots and tubers, gather berries and nuts. And that's now we can't do that, of course. I'm in Wisconsin. We can't dig in the dirt right now. It's frozen. Yeah. And trying to kill animals. Well, we got things to do. You got a medical practice to keep going. You got a podcast to keep going. So I tell everybody that because what we're trying to do is mimic the behavior that is coded into your genetic code. And so these kinds of extremes, you can do extremes because, even people living outside indigenous life do have occasional extremes. Seasonal changes, they can't find certain types of foods, but they're adapted to changes, and they are adapted to a very specific way of living. And it certainly does not include cellophane wrapped, microwavable, drive-through window type foods, nor to prolonged exposure to extremes of a dietary lifestyle.
Yeah, so cycling in fruits when they're local in your area, looking at prebiotics, probiotics, fermented foods like you're talking about with kefir and yogurt. And, I think it's really important. I think even stepping back, looking at it, what I've noticed in practice the last couple of years, focusing on metabolic health with my patients, trying to get them off insulin and diabetes meds and blood pressure meds and all that. What we're finding is when we start taking out the processed food, they drop their insulin levels down, their blood pressure normalizes, they start feeling great. They want to work out, not forcing themselves to work out. But here's what I've noticed all along, and this is why your book is so profound to me, is that I would have the middle-aged real estate agent who's stressed out. We have a meeting and she's 10 minutes late. Sorry, I'm doctor. I don't have pressured speech really fast. I'm like, slow for a second, calm for a second, right? So I started looking into the effects of, there's a great, and I'm going to link to two of these studies, but one of them off the top of my head was talking about the gut brain and food disorders. And so, it was very interesting. Basically their premise was, look, it's the high insulin, high cortisol, screwing up the gut microbiome. You're losing your satiety signals. You're losing and also you lose your dopamine response. So, it's like if you drink 12 beers a day, if I offer you one, it's not going to do anything for you anymore because you're drinking 12 a day, right? So this dopamine response from chronic stress. And so they went back and they said, okay, let's go all the way back to, and you mentioned this in your book too, going all the way back to childhood. If your mom was stressed and eating terrible foods and, you're in a terrible environment, more likely to have obesity, diabetes, and food addiction. Okay. If you're born via C-section rather than vaginal delivery, because you don't pick up the gut microbiome, right? Breastfed versus bottle fed, the more antibiotics you took as a kid, the more obesity and food problems you have. And it goes through, and, living in a stressful environment, or if food was your reward, if you had an A on your test, or if you failed your test, you got food as a make you feel better. And then you look at all these associations over time, and the common denominator seems to be these increased stress levels. Now, the next study I read after this, they took mice and they put them into two different camps. One camp, they put them into Stressville. They have cats roaming around. They're hiding. There's loud noises. They can't sleep. They're scared all the time. The other group, they put them in, they're a Club Med for mice, whatever that is, little sun and peace, nice music, whatever, right? Then they bring them back together 30 days later and they say, okay, let's give you this thing that causes colitis. All the stressed out mice get colitis. The healthy, the peaceful ones don't. Then they said, wow, that's weird. Let's look at the stress hormones. Of course, their stress hormones are higher, their cortisol, insulin, all this kind of stuff. And then they said, let's look at the gut microbiome. And this is why your book excites me so much, because they went into the gut microbiome and they said, okay, let's take out see what it is. No mucus on the stressed out ones, totally screwed up gut microbiome. The other ones, perfect mucus. It was like Teflon protecting them. And the microbiome was perfect. So what they did is they took the gut microbiome out of the sick one, put it in the healthy one, they get sick. Then they take it out of one of the healthy ones, they put it in the sick one, and they get healthy. They go, this is crazy. Then they put the healthy ones on a week of antibiotics. And at the end of the study, they gave them that same medicine. They all got colitis. So you start realizing this is important stuff. We can't just overlook this anymore.
Absolutely. And stress, such a big factor. Of course, we're all stressed out to some degree or another. And I'd love to say, right, hey, get rid of your stress. Well, not so easy. You maybe have an aging parent who's got cognitive impairment, or a child with autistic spectrum disorder, or you got a tough job with a nasty boss, or a bad marriage, or whatever. We all have sources of stress, but it is clear I went through a very stressful period and it really goofed but I didn't recognize it at first. I just thought it was a bad stomach, like, oh, just take some Zantac or some Prilosec, right? No, you've done a major number on your microbiome. I experienced it as rashes everywhere. And I thought, what the heck? What is this? Of course, you go to a dermatologist, he's ready with his prescription pad with steroid creams. No mention, no insight, no interest, as you know, in finding out why this happened. And of course, as you point out, it's all in the microbiome. You got to take efforts to rebuild a healthy microbiome.
And it's so foreign to people because you think, how can skin have anything to do with their microbiome and all these things? But when you look at the toxicity and your immune system being revved up and, psoriasis, all these problems that you mentioned in the book, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, you get your immune system so revved up all the time, and then it's looking for the wrong stuff instead of the right stuff. And then you put yourself at risk of cancers, as you're mentioning. These are huge issues that we have to look at.
You put your finger on a very important issue earlier, and that is the association of a disrupted microbiome and depression. That is big. There's 2 German studies I cringe to think about because they actually did this. So that serum LPS, the lipopolysaccharide we talked about earlier, the breakdown product of stool microbes that gets in your bloodstream. Well, they took this in this German group. It's been clear, as you recall, that people who don't respond to conventional antidepressant medication, SSRIs, are different than people who do respond. And it's become clear people who don't respond are more inflamed. They have higher C-reactive protein, interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, measures of inflammation. And so this one, of course, Big Pharma says, let's give them anti-inflammatory drugs, including biologics for $4,000 a month. Well, this German group did something amazing. They took that LPS, which is very toxic in minor amounts. And if you miscalculate and you inject it into somebody, you can kill them quite promptly. They injected these normal, non-depressed volunteers with LPS. And within 3 hours, they experienced profound depression. And when they did MRIs, they had all the brain hallmarks of depression, suggesting that, yes, inflammation may drive a lot of depression, but it's inflammation from the microbiome via LPS endotoxemia that is a major driver. So in other words, giving somebody an SSRI or just trying to talk them through a depressed episode, well, yeah, those things might help. But what about the microbiome driving LPS and depression? And so, one of the most gratifying experiences in my world, as I'm sure in yours also, is when you help somebody restore their microbiome, is they say things like, as you pointed out in the beginning, I'm happier than I've been in decades. I like people better. I'm less stressed. I'm less critical. I have less critical and hateful thoughts in my internal dialogue. I like myself better. And my sleep is better. I have more vivid dreams. So it's really a testimony to all the brain and emotion and social effects the microbiome has.
Yeah, people don't appreciate that enough. Looking at prisons, they put them on a high sugar diet, they get more violent, they have more outbreaks of, riots and things like that. And you realize, gosh, attention deficit disorder, all of these things we're treating, anxiolytics, you think, gosh, if we get you healthy and you're exercising and you're getting enough sleep, and it's this big circle of problems that if you're stressed out, you don't sleep, you get more stressed, and you get into this nightmare situation. And saying, gosh, let's intervene, because again, I'm telling people, really, I think it's not the Mediterranean diet so much as it is the Mediterranean lifestyle, that they're not stressed out, intense, and running around paying taxes and fighting with their neighbors and arguing on Twitter about stuff. I think when you get into those kind of nasty confrontations, and then also what I find is that people who do the worst with weight loss and metabolic health are the ones who are constantly, they're stressed at work, stressed at home, worried about the kids, worried about everything. But some people, like for me, in my old practice, I was working 16, 18-hour days all the time, one patient after another every 15 minutes, and you want to help them and you can't. And it's just that frustration that you always have, knock on the door, doctor, there's 3 people waiting, you got to hurry. It's like, well, this guy's mom just died, I'm trying to help him, right? So those frustrations, we're taking a toll. As with you, I started getting rashes and hives. My face would swell up, and it turned out it was gut health issues, right? So going low carb and keto for a period is going to fix a lot, because you're not feeding all the bad bacteria and all the bad stuff that's causing all these problems. So you starve those guys out, but at some point, you still, like you said, you got to plant the garden, you got to put the good stuff back in. So that's something that's new to me this year, looking at that, saying, oh yeah, let's look at that. Like, you know, and the important thing is you have recipes, like tell people about some of the recipes that are going to replace some of these gut microbiome. And also stepping back, we didn't really talk about it so much, but the oxytocin is really what helps the babies, the mom to bond with the babies. It gives you compassion to be able to hear someone else's side and say, oh, let's have a discussion about this, not fight, but say, hey, and you mentioned your book too, and I hadn't realized that, is that they'll give people oxytocin before marriage counseling so that they could be reasonable with each other and not fight, right? But it's a short acting, you know, half an hour, 45 minutes type thing. But what you're suggesting is let's replace it all the time.
Yeah. So I tell people that don't be overwhelmed by this. Yeah, you might have to deal with SIBO and similar conditions like fungal overgrowth, but you also want to make an effort to restore healthy microbes, especially the really important ones, so-called keystone species. Keystone like plankton in the ocean. Without plankton, you don't have whales and jellyfish, the filter feeders. Well, some of the microbes are so important, they serve a similar kind of keystone or foundational purpose. And I tell people, think of it like going to a restaurant. When the waitress hands you a menu, you don't have to order all the appetizers and main dishes and desserts. Just pick and choose the ones you want. So if you want, for instance, getting along better with other people, smoother skin, less wrinkles, restoration, youthful muscle, let's restore Lactobacillus Rotary. What if you want a smaller waist and less visceral fat? Let's ferment Lactobacillus gasseri. What if you want less knee arthritis pain? Let's get some Bacillus coagulans. If you want a healthier baby that grows better, has a higher IQ, less likely to have IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, type 1 diabetes, asthma, and allergies, let's get some Bifidobacteria infantis in that child. But my favorite is Lactobacillus Rotary, of course, the one that almost all of us have lost, because when you restore it, as you point out, it takes up residence in the entire GI tract, and it sends a signal via the vagus nerve. This is a great example of the gut-brain axis. Vagus nerve up to the brain, and it tells your brain, release oxytocin. And so people say things like, you know, I like my family better. They don't annoy me as much. I like my coworkers better. I understand other people's points of view better. So I think it makes you a better human being. The ladies love it. They go nuts because there's an explosion in dermal collagen and they get smoother skin. There's also an acceleration of healing. There's restoration of the muscle you lost as you get older. There's preservation of bone density, very helpful in ladies. There's an increase in libido and an increase in the erotic content of your dreams. Like when you were 19, guys experience a rise in testosterone back to youthful levels. Hair growth can be faster. Fingernail, toenail growth can be faster. In other words, so smoother skin, deeper sleep, I failed to mention, with vivid dreams, restoration, youthful muscle and strength, preservation, bone density. You know, I don't think it's a stretch to say that what we're doing with the restoration of Rotary and thereby oxytocin is turning the clock back 10 or 20 years. And you can see it on people's faces too when they share their selfies.
And when their joints don't hurt, you know, and their back's not stiff every day. And I think that was one of the things that surprised me in the book, also talking about berberine and turmeric and how it's not even really absorbed. 99% is not absorbed, but you still get, right? It's sliding through the colon, but it's really working on the gut microbiome as an antibiotic and antifungal, right?
Isn't it something when you look at the human body through the prism of the microbiome, you start to see a lot of goofy stuff going on, like all those people trying to force absorption of things like curcumin. Oh, we're going to add bioperin and piperine and nanoparticle emulsions. We're going to increase absorption by 25%. When what you want is non-absorption. You want the thing to stay in the intestinal tract because that's where it exerts very positive effects. It has antibacterial and antifungal effects against the pathogenic microbes. It helps restore the integrity of the mucus barrier and actually increase the immune response in the intestinal lining. So you don't want that stuff to be absorbed into your knee or brain. You want that stuff to stay where it is in the GI tract.
Yeah, and so you have ways of building up the mucus layer too with some green tea and all these things that we know have worked, but we never really understood the mechanism so much. Like green tea and cloves, putting those together and help increasing your gut mucus.
Yeah, all that agonizing over green tea catechins, people saying, We don't understand. You drink green tea and people lose weight and their visceral fat is reduced modestly, not huge, but modest. But why would that be? Because you poop it all out. It doesn't even get into the body, or at least not a significant amount. Well, it's become clear, as you point out. It's because they have bowel flora and bowel effects. So the green tea among the effects of green tea catechins is they cross-link the proteins in mucus, the mucin proteins, and it converts mucus lining from less of a semi-liquid to a semi-gel. It makes it much thicker, much more durable, much more resistant to the endotoxin, the LPS. So that's why you can lose weight, have reduced inflammation. It has nothing to do with catechin absorptions. All those people trying to find ways to make this the force absorption have been wasting their time, I believe. They just should leave it alone and appreciate that it works through the microbiome and intestinal barriers.
Yeah, and it's amazing too. A lot of these things we think about, one of the things that we hear a lot is the keto flu, right? People get a keto flu when they change their diet radically, and so they feel like garbage. So could it be the LPS that's entering the bloodstream when you're breaking down stuff really quickly from taking away its food, right? I mean, all the bad stuff, the processed food and everything, that might be part, because we always say, well, it's because you're not getting enough sodium, it's because of this and that. But it could be that this is, because I'm seeing it now when I'm treating patients for SIBO. Like for the first week or so, they could feel like real trash. Like they go, oh my gosh, my asthma's worse, my eczema's worse. I'm getting more diarrhea. It's like, ride it out.
Yeah, one of the things I also saw in the wheat belly experience is that, the gliadin protein in wheat, people say gluten, but it's the gliadin within gluten that's responsible for a lot of the problems of modern wheat, because it's been changed dramatically by agribusiness and geneticists. But that gliadin protein, you may recall that wheat and grains are seeds of grasses. That's what they are. And humans just don't have the digestive enzymes to break down the proteins in the seeds of grasses. I mean, it's no surprise. I mean, if your listeners were starving, they and their family stumble on a field of wheat, they'd say it's a field of grass, but you wouldn't say, hallelujah, we're going to eat like kings today, because it's not regarded as food by humans. So it is testimony to the cleverness of humans, ancient humans, who figured out a way to make it consumable, but it is indigestible, the proteins. And so the gliadin protein, at best, is digestible down to 4 or 5 amino acid long peptides or fragments. Even though if you ate bacon or eggs or other protein, you break it down to amino acids, single amino acids, the gliadin protein is broken down to 4 or 5 amino acid long peptides. And these peptides have been demonstrated, research at the National Institutes of Health. This is not some airy-fairy thing we all made up. And those peptides enter the brain and act as opioids. They bind to several opioid receptors and they stimulate appetite. Massive stimulation of appetite. That's why you see people doing things like eating a huge bowl of pasta. They're filled to bursting, and yet they're oddly still hungry. That's among the effects. So getting rid of it. So there's also a modest opioid withdrawal effect. You can provoke it, by the way, by giving it a wheat or grain consuming human naloxone, Narcan, or naltrexone. You can see the effects of opioid withdrawal immediately, relieved, of course, by another hit of wheat or grains.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. Chinese food, then you're hungry an hour later. That's always the joke, eating a lot of rice and noodles and all that. You get these, and we're looking at from the insulin perspective also of you spike your insulin, you see the sugars come down. One thing that's interesting, and I don't know if you've noticed it, but I've seen some of my patients, I'll monitor them with the continuous glucose monitor, and they go to Italy on vacation and they go, doc, when I'm in Italy, I'm going to have some pizza and I'm going to have some pasta. But we don't see the big sugar spikes, and they don't get the bloating. And it seems that they're not getting as much as they do in the US. Have you noticed a difference between old school grain and grain that we have in the US that's more GMO?
Yeah, so there's 200 strains or cultivars of wheat. So there is variation around the world, but they're virtually all, not all, but almost all, the high yield semi-dwarf strains. So even in Italy, Spain, but they're different strains nonetheless. So there are 200 strains, give or take, or cultivars of wheat, and they do vary. They're virtually all the high yield semi-dwarf strain that is a variety that was created through a series of thousands of experiments in Mexico, oddly, in the 1960s. So there is variation in the gliadin protein, there's variation in wheat germ agglutinin, there's variation in phytate content, there's a bunch of variation. It seems that some of the European strains may be less perceived effects, but there's also many unperceived effects, such as, the thing that started this whole conversation at the start, provocation of small LDL. That's due to the amylopectin A carbohydrate unique to wheat and grains. So there's a striking provocation of small LDL particles that lead to cardiovascular risk. And by the way, they persist for about a week, as opposed to the 24 hours of large normal LDL particles. They're more adherent, more glycation and oxidation prone, and more persistent in the bloodstream. There's also, of course, wheat germ agglutinin, which is a potent bowel toxin. So there is variation, but I wouldn't make the leap and say it's therefore good for you.
Well, and it could be that you're there for a week, right? You're there for 10 days. So maybe you haven't developed the autoimmune type stuff to that strain yet. And if you stayed there for a long time, you'd start seeing that same effect maybe from gut inflammation. So I don't know, it's just interesting because I've kind of noticed, and I thought it was maybe the processing. And I hear the same thing about wine. People say, when I go to Europe, I drink wine, I feel great. I come here and I get a headache. So, I don't know what the difference is, but it seems to be relatively, common.
Glyphosate, herbicides.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. And glyphosate. And the other really important topic you bring up is I've seen people on a ketogenic diet, but they're having keto cookies and keto donuts and keto cake. Everything's keto, but you look at these emulsifiers they're using in the keto ice cream, right? And those are going to mess up your gut mucus barrier also. And you raise a huge point, because we always debate, the big debate we're having in low carb is, okay, our diet soda is okay. Well, what does it do to your insulin? So, but you say, okay, what does it do to your gut microbiome? That changes the perspective a little bit. Sometimes what we've debated, aspartame and sodas, or diet sodas, and the question always is, well, what's it doing to your insulin level? But part of it, like that you raise, is it could be destroying your gut microbiome and causing a problem, right? Not just what the insulin is acutely when you take it.
Right. It's looking like so many things have the potential, pardon me, to disrupt your microbiome. As you point out, the synthetic sweeteners like aspartame, sucralose, and saccharin. So Benoit Chesang has done that work in Georgia. Excellent work. There are other drugs like stomach acid blocking drugs that are very, very common, and not uncommonly, as taken for 10, 20 years, which is a setup for SIBO, because stomach acid is a barrier to the ascent of unhealthy stool microbes. When you lose stomach acid, the bad guys like E. coli and Klebsiella start to ascend. Emulsifying agents in common foods like ice cream, as you point out, salad dressings, peanut butter, food preservatives like potassium sorbate. No surprise, they're put into foods to keep bacteria from growing. Well, when you consume them, they also have antibacterial effects. Chlorinated drinking water disrupts your mucus barrier. And whenever you disrupt the mucus barrier, you also introduce changes in the microbiome composition. So unfortunately, it's almost impossible to avoid all the things that disrupt the microbiome. So I think we have to accept this fact that everybody, 100%, starts with some measure of dysbiosis, and not uncommonly, sadly, profound disruption, but typically not recognized as that. And as you know, what you're doing is very unique in recognizing these things in your patients, but sadly, the majority of mainstream docs don't do that. They ignore it, or give you a steroid cream for the rash caused by your dysbiosis, or give you an antidepressant for the depression caused by your disrupted microbiome, or give you a biologic for the autoimmune disease that was caused by your disrupted microbiome. So as you and I are talking, it's clear that you got to pay attention to the microbiome.
Yeah, and also, a lot of people say, well, you take the responsibility off the patient when you start talking about this, but it really puts more responsibility. Say, look, we can get you off these meds, but it's going to take some lifestyle changes. You're going to have to look at the stress level, the sleep, exercise. Exercise improves gut microbiome. Even intermittent fasting has been shown to increase the diversity of the gut microbiome. Surprisingly enough, after reading these things, sauna, just sitting in the sauna has a positive effect on the gut microbiome, lowering the stress hormones. So I think our focus really, we have to look at these things and say, okay, let me put good stuff in there, take out the bad stuff. Let me do what I can on this side. If I have a stressful, like what would you tell someone if they go, look, doc, I know stress is killing me. But I'm the CEO of this company and I'm working X number, 80 hours a week. I'm not sleeping. What would you tell that person to help them get on track to better health? Or what are things that they can do on this side? Because the worst thing you can do is say, because it's very clear, stress plays a huge role in the microbiome, stress hormones, all this stuff. But when you tell a stress stressed out person. Hey, your stress is causing your weight gain and all your fatigue and all this stuff. Okay, what do I do, doc? Like, what would you tell that person?
I think, first of all, making the connection, letting them know that stress is not just a matter of being in a hurry and having a high blood pressure. It really has profound implications for health long term in the form of heart disease, cancer, depression, et cetera. And a lot of that's exerted and mediated by the microbiome. I think just bringing their awareness to that fact, I think is at least a start. Maybe that person starts to recognize, maybe I should cut back, find ways to cut back on my stress. As you point out, do things that mitigate stress. Could be yoga, could be meditation, could be a walk in the forest, could be sauna. But taking those steps to reduce some of the damage, minimize. We can't eliminate, but minimize the factors that disrupt the microbiome. So drink only filtered water. We have to filter our water. There's sewage in it, right? Other things. So filter your water. Try to, whenever possible, based on availability and cost, try to get organic foods that don't have herbicide, pesticide residues. Minimize your exposure to antibiotics. So if someone tries to prescribe an antibiotic, question them, is this really needed? Is it necessary? And if so, and by the way, we make a Saccharomyces boulardii cider and other juices, because Saccharomyces boulardii taken during antibiotics is probably among the most powerful things you can do to blunt the destructive effects of antibiotics on your microbiome. So that really helps. It's real easy to make. The recipe's in my blog. That recipe's not in the book, by the way, but it's easy as heck. It's a capsule of Flora Store, the commercial probiotic, emptied into a quart or gallon, volume doesn't make a difference, of some juice. Apple cider is a good one. I'm currently fermenting mango, passion fruit, and coconut milk with pineapple juice. So high in sugar, but the Saccharomyces converts it to other metabolites. So the end product after 48 hours or so is low in sugar. And it's packed with high dose Saccharomyces boulardii. Just make sure there's no preservatives in the juice, like potassium sorbate. And it's delicious. It's effervescent. It's sparkling. And it's fun as heck to drink. And it's shocking when you watch the thing ferment after 24 hours. It looks like a cauldron bubbling away. That's how rapid and vigorous the fermentation process is. But anyway,
sounds like fun to me. Yeah,
it is a lot of fun.
That'll calm your nerves by itself, just making the stuff, right?
But it raises the issue of, among the most important things. People think that probiotics are the kind of the big salute. It's not. Commercial probiotics are very flawed because they're haphazard collections of microbes without a whole lot of forethought. They're going to get better. They're going to incorporate such things as keystone species, as what are called collaborative guilds or consortia of bacteria. Bacteria, just like humans, we don't live by ourselves. We live with partners, families, groups, communities. Microbes are the same way, but they collaborate in producing metabolites. And so the only product I'm aware of that has incorporated that principle is the BiotaQuest Sugar Shift. And I have no relation with the company except that the two founders, Martha Carlin and Dr. Raul Cano, a microbiologist with 40-year academic history, that's the only product I know where Dr. Cano actually in an in vitro preparation proved that this collection of microbes collaborates. And when you put them together, healthy metabolites increase dramatically, including mannitol. Mannitol is a product of metabolism by these microbes of fructose, glucose, sucrose. Mannitol goes up. Humans can't digest mannitol, but it crosses into the brain. One of the projects they're working on is when mannitol crosses into the brain, if we believe the experimental evidence, it dissolves the alpha-synuclein protein of Parkinson's disease. Anecdotally, they're seeing partial remission of Parkinson's disease. Now they need to do that clinical trial, prove it once and for all. That's a big claim, right? But that was the rationale for the creation of this consortium or guild. That's the only product I know of where that principle has been factored in.
And people are going to want you to say that again. It was Sugar Shift by what company is it?
So Sugar Shift. It's called Sugar Shift because we submitted 20 people just to an anecdotal experience. It reduced blood sugar by 10 milligrams per deciliter, non-diabetics, which is profound. They need to do that clinical trial.
Wow. Have you looked at the effect on insulin levels?
No. So this is just really in the setting of, it would be. It would be very interesting because, there's a lot of things going on in blood sugar, and I think they've stumbled onto is very important. And it's probably by way of that mannitol metabolic product. So that's an exciting product.
Anecdotally, I have 2 patients on mannitol that they went on it based on what they heard on the internet, and it's improved their Parkinson's, their gait stability, and things like that. So that is kind of exciting things that we don't think about that can contribute to health.
Yeah. Now they need to do the clinical trials to prove once and for all these things are true. You can't make such claims without proof.
Exactly.
But there's real rationale behind. But my point is that this is the only product I'm aware of, probiotic product, where that very important phenomenon of group collaboration, consortium, guild has been incorporated. So there's lots of improvements that need to be made in the world of probiotics. In the meantime, it doesn't hurt to take a probiotic, because it does increase the mucus lining. It does help compete with pathogens like E. coli. So they do provide some. It can reduce endotoxemia somewhat. But the most important thing your listeners can do is do what your grandmother did and ferment your foods. Kefirs, not yogurt, yes, but not the stuff in the store. The stuff in the store is, for the most part, non-fermented, because in production, commercial production, you have to go as fast as you can for profit. We're going to ferment not for 4 hours as they do in a factory. We're going to ferment for 36 hours. And we allow microbes like Rotary that doubles every 3 hours to double 12 times. When we perform flow cytometry on our yogurts, we're getting typically 250, 260 billion counts per half cup serving. That's part of the reason why, by the way, some of the yogurt doesn't have to be yogurt, but yogurt's so easy. That's one of the reasons why I think we get these huge effects, because we're getting big numbers. But veggies, I've got all kinds of veggies fermenting on my counter. It's virtually free. Just got to use filtered water, non-iodized salt, chop your veggies up, put them below the surface, and the microbes resident on the skin, on the veggie surface, will ferment for you. Or you can add starter cultures for a few dollars, and it accelerates the process. Both work fine, and you restore microbes. And it's clear from the research done by the husband-wife team, Justin and Erica Sonnenberg at Stanford, that study just from a few months ago, they showed that frequent consumption of fermented foods in a variety of forms is probably at the top of the list of things you can do. All the things we stopped doing since 1927, when refrigeration became a home phenomenon.
Yeah, I'm making sauerkraut right now. I'm pushing down the cabbage there and doing, it's kind of cool. Like, it's like, that's heritage type stuff. Like, that's the good stuff. And kimchi. What's your take on kombucha? It seems like a lot of, like, nowadays, it seems like a lot of them have a ton of preservatives, like the marketed stuff out there is probably, if you're going to make it. Do you think there's a benefit to that? Or apple cider vinegar? Do you see any benefit in those, adding that in?
The kombucha is a wonderful thing. The problem, once again, with commercial production is they keep the fermentation time as brief as possible. So while the kombucha you make yourself typically will have tens to hundreds of billions of a wide variety of bacteria as well as fungi, commercial products tend to have very small counts. So if anybody doesn't want to make their own, I have kombucha. I have 2 containers of kombucha on my counter. It's a crazy process, like having another pet. You got to take care of that darn SCOBY. Mm-hmm. But if someone chooses to buy commercial kombucha, what I do is leave it on the counter, cap on, of course, leave it on the counter for several days, and let the microbes double and increase, and it minimizes the sugar. So unfortunately, by the FDA's requirement, the sugar listed on the label is the amount of sugar put in at the start, which is not the same as the sugar remaining after some fermentation has occurred in the bottle. So there is some sugar because it'll be a little sweet. Let it sit in your counter and let it ferment further, and then use this built-in sweet testing device you have called a tongue and see how much sugar's left. So less sugar, more microbes. It won't achieve the kind of high microbial counts that we get from a real kombucha, because that's got the SCOBY in it. But it's at least better than nothing.
All right. How about apple cider vinegar?
I've not seen an analysis of, but apple in general is a great fermenting vehicle. It's got pectin, it's got other sugars, and bacteria love that stuff. So it's a good source of microbes. The microbes we get from a lot of fermented foods are underappreciated, I think. These are species like Leuconostoc mesenteroides and Pediococcus pentasaceus and Lactobacillus plantarum and Pediococcus acidilactici. These are really important microbes. But if we believe what the Sonnenbergs have published, incredibly, these microbes only take up residence for a few days, maybe a few weeks, but they somehow, by some means, no one knows exactly how, they make it a fertile ground for other microbes to appear. It's not clear if those microbes were just latent, or you're more receptive to getting them from other people, surfaces, dogs, whatever. But even though you're not populating with the fermenting microbes, something changes in the human microbiome when you get those fermented foods.
Yeah, and then having some variety, like maybe kimchi one day and sauerkraut, changing it up, and fermented vegetables and kombucha one time. Being able to add that variety into your diet too, and enjoying it, like kefir, if you can get a good source of that. I'll ask you one other question, and I know I want to be respectful of your time, but man, when you have this smart guy here, you got to take advantage a little bit. What's interesting, I've done a lot of medical trips overseas, and there's a really smart doc in Guatemala that I work with, and a lot of these guys are not overweight and they have type 2 diabetes in the country, and we start talking about the problem of diabetes. I'm talking about metabolic health, and from my perspective, and he understood a lot of that, and he goes, Doc, I'm telling you, if some of these people from poor areas that have terribly controlled diabetes, if you get them on whole milk, they do better, like raw milk, and they do better. And I said, but there's a lot of sugar in milk. He said, they do better. Their sugars improve. I don't know why, but it does. And I wonder if it has something to do with the gut microbiome or something they're missing, some deficiency in their diet.
I've seen this happen many times now, that informally, anecdotally, that is, people do the basic things in my program, which are wheat and grain elimination, which, by the way, and sugar, which by itself reduces blood sugar dramatically, reduces insulin resistance dramatically. But then I fold in the nutrients that are missing from modern life, not from the diet, but from modern life. So magnesium, for instance, because we have to filter our water, vitamin D. You're in San Diego, but people work indoors. They wear clothes outside that cover most of the body's surface area. And of course, as we age, particularly after age 40, we progressively lose the capacity to activate vitamin D in the skin. So adding vitamin D, iodine, because there's so much marginal hypothyroidism around from lack of iodine, and then omega-3 fatty acids, which, by the way, activates intestinal alkaline phosphatase, an enzyme that lines your intestines, that deactivates at least some of the LPS from those stool microbes. So that mix of nutrients also further reduces the insulin resistance that drives high blood sugar. And then what surprised me was everybody's doing all that in my programs. But then we add all these other things, like frequent consumption of fermented foods, maybe a probiotic, and those fibers, and I'll see blood sugars plummet. Or do something like a sugar shift consortium and watch blood sugars. So I have to say, I did not appreciate how profound the influence of the microbiome is on blood sugar and insulin control.
Yeah, and I think, also the other phenomena that we see a lot is that we see like people are doing great on a low carb diet. They're cutting out the processed food, and then Thanksgiving comes and Christmas comes, and then they're off the rails for 3 months. So part of that may be the gut microbiomes. It seems like candida and some of these will release chemicals that make you more hungry or make you not lose your willpower, basically. And so as you feed them more, that problem becomes worse. So when you start starving them out again, then people say, "Oh, I'm doing great." Like if they do a short-term fast, like a 36-hour, 20-hour fast, something like that, it seems to be helping. Like get back on track easier than trying to cut back slowly over time. Yeah,
true. I do some other things too, and that when you eliminate the gliadin protein from wheat and grains, as you recall, gliadin-derived opioids drive appetite. So you get rid of that. That alone reduces your appetite and temptation and gives you impulse control much greater. Then we restore Rotary. That provokes oxytocin, and oxytocin has a so-called anorexigenic effect. That is, it makes you indifferent to food, which is food still tastes great, of course, but you can walk away from any temptation. It gives you profound control. And of course, we don't limit fat, that absurd idea of cutting fat, saturated fat. And so you're more likely to be satiated. And then, of course, other changes in the microbiome. And we find that one of the other things I learned in practice was that, as you point out, people doing great. They lost all this weight. Their blood sugar's great. Their blood pressure's great. Small LDL is down to 0. They come back after Thanksgiving 14 pounds heavier and metabolic disasters. So one of the things I did, people always say, just eat a good diet with real foods. I found out that you have to, at least to some degree, show them how to make alternatives. I know this can be taken to excess, but I showed people how to make muffins, cookies, and biscuits and gravy, pumpkin pie, those kinds of things without sugar, without grain ingredients. And you can make delicious replacement foods like a cheesecake and have it. And what I saw then was if you gave those people those kind of outs, those alternatives, they'd come back after Thanksgiving, typically without gaining weight, sometimes even losing weight. And so while it can be overused, I do find it kind of helps for a lot of people.
Well, along those lines, this year I had 5 people lose weight over the holidays, and I'm looking at their sugar, and they were spiking their sugars a bit. But the thing they all had in common, and this is what sent me down this road of looking at it, all of them have high stress jobs, and they took 2 weeks off during the holidays. One went to Mexico and ate more tortillas and more carbs than he's eaten in the last 6 months. But he said, I didn't worry about the phone. I turned off everything. And I've seen that multiple times where people do well. And then the other person who's stressed about their weight and weighs themselves 6 times a day doesn't lose any weight. It's just such an amazing, the stress and the cortisol, instead of saying, let me trust the process and keep moving along, right? Let me get a little bit better every day.
Oh, very nice observation. Very good.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing because, we think it's all about diet. That's why I started my other podcast, Life's Best Medicine, say like what else matters. And in closing, I would love to hear, like, if for you, what's life's best medicine? What pumps you up? What keeps you going? What moves you forward? Like, on your deathbed, what would you say? This is what matters, guys.
Right. Grim thought. But, I don't think it's a stretch to say that we're having to redefine what healthcare is all about. That as we find out that there's a whole universe of solutions, insights into human health, how did we get anything right before thinking about the microbiome? Because I am just seeing every day, I hear some amazing, fantastic new finding, new experience that, just with Rotary and oxytocin, I mean, liking people better, understand their point of view better, restoring youthful muscle, a restoration of youthful libido. And we're talking about some earth. Who would have thought? In this case, one microbe could do that. And that's just one microbe, of course. So I'm extremely excited that late in my career that I'm having to rethink everything I was taught, everything I learned over the last 40 years.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think that's what being able to learn, being able to say, okay, let me keep an open mind and look at, maybe it's our oxytocin's a little bit better than other people's, that we don't get offended if someone questions what you've been doing. Say, oh, let me reassess and see if we can get it a little bit better. Because obviously you saw cutting out wheat and sugar improve people, but then you say, well, how come they're not getting 100% better, right? How come they're not getting to their baseline of excellent health? And then you realize, oh, we have to fix the underlying, from all the stress and all the Cheetos and all the garbage food we ate, when we were kids. We have to fix that underlying problem. And I think that's what's so exciting about this discussion about the gut microbiome, because everything I look back and I say, this makes sense from this standpoint of what we're looking at, of why some people are struggling. And I think going back, looking at the stress, the exercise, the sleep, all these things that we kind of neglect, say, just eat this food and you're going to be fine, right? Or just take this pill and you'll be great. Your blood pressure will be great now. Oh, why is the blood pressure high? We don't think along those terms. And I think for you as a cardiologist, my respect, because it's a tough field. I know when you start saying, hey, low fat's crazy, and you're the only guy saying that, you take a lot of bullets and spears to the back from your colleagues. And it's tough being, someone says it's not hard being right. It's just being right too early because no one else gets what you're saying and they think you're crazy. So how did you weather that storm, by the way?
As you know, it's very satisfying when you see extravagant successes in your patients. When I was able to tell them, yeah, if you do this, you can regress your coronary disease. We'll watch your coronary calcium score drop from 750 to 300. We'll watch your HDL go from 30 to 98. We'll watch your triglycerides drop from 325 to 42. Watch your hemoglobin A1C drop from 7% down to 4.4%. Your visceral fat shrink, your blood pressure is normalized. You feel better, you look better, your skin look. And so I saw from that point of view, that is, I saw people saying, holy crap, this is not just taking stinking Lipitor or a baby aspirin. So I tell people that the things that you and I do, the health you gain by this route is dramatically superior to the kind of health you get from a prescription pad. So that was gratifying, even though my colleagues thought it was nuts. Oh, you better take Lipitor because that diet's going to cause a heart attack.
And it's sustainable. It's sustainable when you enjoy it and you have variety like you're having, making all these crazy concoctions and having fun doing it, not being tortured like, oh, I don't want those things so bad. I think that mindset makes a huge difference too.
You know, that's a point we should reiterate, and that is, you know, people think this, oh my God, so much. It's fun. It is incredibly fun. And you know what? When you're happy, when you pop out of bed, full of optimism and hope and love for other people, you know, it's not burdensome. It's not tough. It's actually a lot of fun.
Yeah, Doc, we'll close on that. And everyone, I have a stamp at my office, Super Gut. Get it, take a look at it. You're going to start realizing if you have chronic urinary infection, you have chronic, all these things we're dealing with, eczema and rashes, and you're rubbing lotions all over. Try to fix the inside and see what happens, and fix the inside too of stress and life, and get some balance. Think of the Maasai, all these guys out there in the jungle doing their thing and, you know, living life, and, you know, and looking at this ancient wisdom that we have that we kind of just push to the side. We say we have pills for that now. And Doc, I want to invite you back at whenever you have time to do talk about Undoctored, also about what's going on with our healthcare system. I think that's really, really important. That, you know,
be happy to.
We're seeing doctors get more sick than everyone else, right? Because of the stress in life, and being a cog in the wheel, and all those things that we've transitioned medicine into a total disaster. You know, a machine shop where we've lost our connection, this oxytocin effect, and all these other things you're talking about. So, people, get your oxytocin. You know, look at this stuff. Make some yogurt and all this. I'm going to be making all this stuff. So I think it's great. And I'll tell you, Doc, thank you, because I can help my patients much better because of you and because of people like Jason Fung and people who stepped out and said, hey, let's look at this difference. We're not fixing the problem. So much respect, and thank you for joining me.
And to you, because I really do appreciate it. You may have noticed that you and me are no longer welcome on major media, because it's contrary to the interests of big pharma and their direct consumer drug advertising spending. So I deeply appreciate what you're doing, broadcasting these kinds of ideas and telling our colleagues, get at the cause. Don't just give people symptom-reducing drugs or procedures, get at the cause.
Yeah, and amen to that. And I think both of us agree, hey, we don't practice medicine for our colleagues. We practice medicine for our patients, and our patients are going to go back to our colleagues and go, hey, look, all my stuff's getting better off of meds, and I stopped. And I'll tell you that's the thing that makes me sad. There's a big hospital group here, an HMO group, and I take care of a lot of their patients for metabolic stuff, and I'm not contracted with them. Their patients just come to me and seek me out because their doctor's saying, oh, eat less, exercise more, and then you'll be fine. And they're getting sicker and they're getting diabetes. But I sent a patient back to one of the docs. She lost 58 pounds. She came off 5 medicines, including insulin. And the doctor never said, hey, you lost weight, or hey, like, no observation. Go, okay, we'll just change your med list. We'll see you next time. Like, it's amazing, because you and I see that and go, what the heck did you do? Do you have cancer? You know, what's happening? So I think when you lose that excitement, so I could see the passion in your eyes that you're loving this stuff. And probably in a year or two, you'll come out with a new book with a new addition to all this stuff. So thank you for taking the time to put all this on to paper. I know it's a lot of work and a lot of, but all your research and everything you do, your hard work is paying off for a lot of people. So thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.